all heard me smiling, but when I started the Community Roundtable 5 years ago, everyone was going, "What's a community manager?" So it's really nice to hear so many people saying how important community managers are to the success of social business. And the work that we do with 90 to 100 companies demonstrates to me that they're really at the forefront of helping people change to adapt new, more efficient processes. And that is their job, is to support that change. And somebody asked me recently to, like, in a nutshell, what is community management? And the answer I gave them was, well, and it comes from my perspective, which is right now community management is a role, but I actually consider it the discipline of management going forward, meaning it's going to blend into how you manage, because everything's going to be done in networked communications environments. So in essence, it's the new management. But it's also how you get things accomplished without telling people what to do. And this is really important, because the old concept of management is kind of task distribution. That's no longer required in these open environments. You can push responsibility and opportunity down to the individual level. So the community manager's job is to help people understand how to execute on that opportunity and those responsibilities in a way that's most efficient for both themselves and the business. And there's a lot of ways you can do that. One of the things that I see happening when people think about community management today is they think very reactively. They set up a community, and they may even have a halftime resource looking at the community, and they're waiting, and they're waiting, and then they go, well, there's nothing going on here. And I'm like, well, you're not doing anything to create an environment where somebody would want to do something here. So why are you not surprised? And I was teaching a class on community management yesterday, and the thing that I find the saddest, really the saddest communities out there are not actually the completely dead communities. They're the communities where the community manager has posted 10 times over the course of a number of weeks, and there's no responses. Because the other people coming into that community, it's like coming into a party where you haven't had your friends come over to make sure that people are not like the lone wolf, like staring into the headlights, because that's an uncomfortable place to be socially. You don't want to be the only one, or very few people are willing to be the only one, and that's true in the corporate environment too. And when you think about adoption, what we're all trying to do is introduce new behaviors to a social environment. Who's willing to be the strange guy dancing on the hill by themselves for 2 hours? Like, how many people? There's a few out here, and this crowd gets a few more than the average crowd, but it's really hard to find that person. And it's really hard to introduce a new behavior to an organization. And so that needs a lot of support. That first person, your job as a community manager is to be the first follower. So that person doesn't feel like they're out there dancing, and nobody cares, and they're dancing. Your job is to not make people feel alone when they're doing something innovative, and to solicit the third and the fourth person, because with every incremental behavior change, it's cheaper. The first behavior change is very expensive, and it's a geometric flow, and eventually you get to a tipping point, and everybody comes along with you because it's the thing to do now. But that has some implications for how we manage these programs. We get a lot of pressure, see a lot of pressure to get results today from a lot of people. If you just heard me say behavior change is hard for those first few people, you can't change 10,000 people at once. You can only change one person at a time. And executives don't always understand this. It's a different way of thinking, but it's actually a more sustainable way of getting culture change. So my message around community management is you're really going slow to go fast later. You're going slow with the first adoption of of new behaviors and processes. But I was actually asked to talk about engagement. And one big overarching issue with engagement is perfection is the enemy of engagement. And all of our business cultures today are cultures of perfection. I don't want to release something for feedback until I think it's perfect, because that exposes me or that makes me feel threatened. So part of the job of changing behaviors is allowing people to share incrementally, which is it's kind of the agile approach to project management. It's coming up through engineering, and we're learning a lot of things, and we always have, about community management through open source engineering communities. But that is very uncomfortable, particularly for people in business situations that are very political. So they're hard nut to crack, and executives, particularly to Claire's point, are taught to be perfect and assertive and declarative. It's very hard to engage with that unless you're a real rebel. And most people won't. If an executive comes into a community and says, I like it this way, who's gonna respond to that and argue? Be like, nah, it's a bad idea. Nobody's gonna do that. So part of this is helping people understand that that's not the way to communicate, that asking questions and leaving things open-ended is a better way to get engagement. So let's dive in here. One of the things that I was very excited last year to do is do some research against the 99-1 rule, which is thrown around a lot as the engagement pyramid. I'm not even sure there was ever research to support this. And that pyramid definitely, there are communities that exhibit that engagement profile. They're typically large public communities out on the web. However, if you are only engaging 10% of your employees, that's kind of sad. So it doesn't work for every community, and we had been saying this for a while, but we didn't have research. So we finally did some research, and good community management can have this even surprised me, can have a dramatic effect on how engaged people are, to the point where the average of the top 20% of engaged communities, there's more content contributors than lurkers in those communities. So what I'm here to tell you is, if you're using the 99-1 rule, it's a crutch. Stop it. If that's the best you can hope for, you're not going to change your organization that way. So I believe not having community management, and you can call this many things, it doesn't need to be called community management, but not having somebody own the success of this process is risky. And it's risky in 5 primary ways. There's lots of ways it can go deviant, but there's 5 primary ways. The first is one we see all the time. It's the one people are most fearful. Nothing happens at all. There's an opposite problem, and most organizations internally don't have this opposite problem. It's usually a problem out in the open web. But you can get land of 1,000 flowers, meaning everybody is participating, but you can't find any value. Meaning it's chit, 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 things aren't organized, new people coming in look at it and they're like, I don't know, I don't even know what to do. There's thousands of things here and none of them make sense for me. There's drama central. This is when people just want to bitch. Excuse my language. There's a use case from years ago now, but internal communications decided to put up a blog as a suggestion box because morale was bad. And so they got a lot of suggestions, they got a lot of engagement. Morale got worse, and they were like, the blog's not working. They took the blog down. I was like, no, community management wasn't working. You had no community management. You didn't actually solve any problem. So yes, of course people got more upset because it was just a festering sore. So don't put that up there without any resources to deal with it. This is slightly similar, which is a circling storm. This is when there's really legitimate issues that are not being addressed and solved. And they can kind of go on for a low level kind of chatter for a long time, and then they can spike really suddenly without much notice when something triggers that. And if you're not paying attention to this, it can blindside you in terms of internal or external crises. People are getting better at this, at least people are listening now, even if they're not actively managing their communities, so we've kind of gotten past a lot of that. And this is the last one, which is kind of deceptive, because initially having a clique that really loves your community is a good thing, because they're really engaged. However, if they take over the community, it won't grow, because cliques are typically not very welcoming, and they have their own way of communicating. And that's not necessarily bad, but if that's all people see when they come into the network or the community, and that's not who they are, they will leave and they will never come back. And I use the example a lot, and probably unfairly, but I use the example of IT groups are often the first ones to really make use of an internal network, because they understand the technology, they're a little more comfortable with it. It can become an IT network if you're not careful. So your job as the community manager is to make sure that it's not owned by just one little subset of the total population that you're trying to reach, because that will inhibit growth. So the chart I had was great. Community managers can really help engagement. But not all engagement is created equal. Not all of it is valuable. So my message to you is, don't be the fried Twinkie. Don't have empty calories in your engagement. Like, don't just shoot for lots of activity. That's not what you want. And actually, we have a little problem on the metric side of most community platforms, because it's generated out of, or it's evolved out of web analytics, which says I'm looking at page views to view the value of something. And that's really kind of bogus. It's not bad to know the volume. That's a helpful number to see if people are interested in the content. But what was it? Charlie Bet My Finger, the video on YouTube, has more views than all TED videos combined. Which is more valuable? Clearly. So really, it depends on your audience, what the value for that video is, but know what you're trying to get out. So some recommendations for engagement. You need to define the engagement you need to create business value. Like, what does that look like? Who's talking to each other? What are they saying to each other? What level of complexity is that? Secondly, we've built a template called an engagement recipe, and I'll get into what that is. But it's a helpful way to just think through how to build programming in your community or approaches in your community that get you to the interaction that's actually valuable for you. And then make the move. So what is engagement? We all talk about it. We all want it. What is it? Is it activity? It's not teenage sex, Louise. So get that off your mind. To me, valuable engagement advances something. And depending on what your business goal is, you're trying to advance something different. And depending on the phase that you're in, meaning how mature your community is. If your community is relatively immature and people don't really know who they're talking to yet, your focus should really be on advancing relationships. So there's a level of trust within your community that you can get to these more advanced engagement outcomes. But really, it's advancing a solution, an idea, expertise or skill, a product idea, a concept, something. But engagement, depending on your goal, can look really different. Meaning, are you chit-chatting at the bus stop, or are you negotiating peace in the Middle East? Those two engagements look very different. The people involved are very different. The formality is very different. The type of content shared is very different. The preparation before the engagement is very different. So really having a very detailed idea of what you think success looks like and you can actually sit down and be like, I want so-and-so talking to so-and-so, and they're just going to be discussing this, and you can kind of map that out. And the better the idea you have in your head of what that looks like, the quicker you're going to get there, because you're going to kind of have a laser focus on the people you want to change and get involved there. Whereas if you're just going for general engagement, you know, any bird will do in that situation. So really be very clear about that. Secondly, I'm a process geek. I'm an analyst, so I put models around everything, which can be horrible in a relationship, but I put a relationship model together just to kind of give myself an idea of what happens at different stages of a relationship. And in this stage, in the awareness stage, I may run into somebody on the street, I never see them again, and I have no kind of recognition of them. But that may be okay if awareness is my goal. If I'm just trying to build market awareness, it may not matter so much that people be able to remember the context and where they ran across it, etc. But for most of your use cases internally, they're going to be more complex than that. Second stage of a relationship is recognition and context recall for where and what kind of conversation you had with somebody. And then you go into this development or fit assessment stage. This is the dating phase of personal relationships, but it's also the kind of business negotiation phase in business. I have something, I need something, you have something, you need something, do they fit? That stage is going to go much faster the better you understand what you want, meaning the more self-aware you are about what your skills and capabilities are and what you need in return, the faster that's going to go. If you don't know who you are and you don't know what you want, you can spend your entire life cycling through the development stage of relationships. This applies to business and personal, by the way. And then you get, I've called it friendship. Somebody brought up the point yesterday that that's kind of an awkward name, but I don't have a good substitute. It's this stage of contextual trust. I trust you in this one domain, but I don't necessarily trust you in another domain. I trust your community management expertise, but I'm not going shoe shopping with you, for example. And then you move on to a partnership phase where your success is my success. So any problem you have is a problem for me, and I'm going to do my best to help you solve that problem, whether or not that's kind of what we're in this relationship for primarily. So thinking about what level of relationship you need to get the engagement you want, meaning what level of trust do you need? Are you negotiating business strategy, which is really helpful to have a partnership level relationship there because people's defenses are lower and you can have really authentic conversations. I would say most executive teams don't actually have that, but it's helpful to have that. So thinking through that is really helpful. I don't think you can get to the partnership stage without direct engagement. Really hard to do digitally. It's just, we're human, we like seeing each other. Social media has really supercharged the front of this funnel, meaning we can share content wide and far with a lot of people very easily. I think communities play a really important role in the middle here. They can really accelerate our ability to find information in people who have things. I can go direct to the source when I have a problem and not have to play the game of telephone that we do in most of our organizations when we're looking for a solution. Instead, I can directly find the source and the person who knows how to solve my problem. And we can accelerate relationships pretty far. And some of you know Anne McCrossan in this room. I've never met her in person. I think she's great. She's coming to Paris for dinner tomorrow, which is awesome. Because we've been stuck in this phase because we haven't met in person. But I can get to a friendship stage with people. A lot of you I've met for the first time here, and we've been friendly online for a while. So the next step is just some practical tips on how to build a recipe box of engagement recipes. And this is built on the work of B.J. Fogg, who's a behavioral psychologist at Stanford, and he created this behavior model. And for purposes here, it really is made up of three things. The person's motivation, the ability, which is how easy is it for me to execute on something, and then a trigger. And to get engagement, all three of those have to combine to get a behavior change. I use Facebook as an example here because they have made the ability really, really high. It's very easy for me to like a page on Facebook. Brutally easy for me to like a page on Facebook. So my motivation doesn't have to be very high. And I get triggered all the time. They make sure I get triggered all the time to like pages on Facebook. So I like a lot of pages on Facebook. But if I'm a page owner on Facebook, I have no idea the network that I have. Are they really committed? Are they advocates? Were they flybys? I would guess most of them were flybys, but I don't know what percentage because there was no barrier to entry. And so I had no ability to judge their motivation. There was no kind of trigger there. So it's something to think about again when you're thinking about engagement. A lot of people go for scale, and I'm like, I don't want scale. I want people motivated enough so that when they come into the community, they are going to engage because they care about the topic. So if you can't find those people and you have a barrier to entry, you need to go back and look at your community strategy because clearly it's not compelling to anyone. So, you know, I really think this is an interesting tool to kind of play with a little bit. And triggers are really important, and people forget about them. Meaning, your motivation could be high, the ability could be relatively easy, but you forget about it. It's one of the reasons I love Twitter. I do so much business on Twitter DMs. People are shocked. But the reason is Twitter allows triggers to happen constantly. So if I'm in somebody's, and business usually happens not after I'm talking about business, it happens after I'm talking about the weather, my daughter, whatever. I come up in somebody's stream and they DM me and they're like, oh, we should chat. I'm like, it's Sunday at 10 p.m. Of course we should chat. But it's a trigger. So thinking about triggers and triggers don't have to be in the tool, they can be offline triggers, but thinking about how you can trigger people naturally to the behavior you want is really important. So if you combine these three things, you get engagement recipes. And I have a quirky little one. You will have your own depending on the business goals that you're looking for. I have a best profile competition here just because it's really critical that people have profile pictures in your community. People won't trust the community if all they see is blank avatars. People really respond to the human face. So it's really important, and I know in Europe you can't demand that people put their picture up, so you have to encourage them nicely. You have to construct social pressure such that they feel weird if they don't put their picture up. And so you can run some programs, and here I've said, you know, the motivators here are recognition for people, competition, and peer pressure. Those are the things I'm going to apply to this problem. I'm going to create some tools so it's easier for them to do that. Maybe I'll have a demo of how to do it. Maybe I'll hire a professional photographer because one of the barriers to doing that is people don't have good digital images and they feel self-conscious about that. Then maybe I'll have like a little competition of who likes whose profile picture the best because people love competitions around silly things. And then the triggers, I'm going to announce it, I'm going to have updates, I'm going to have deadlines, I'm going to highlight peer examples, I may blog about the most interesting profile of the week or the day, I could do offline events and put up visuals of profiles around the cafeteria. There's all sorts of ways I could create triggers for that. But that's just an example of one. And as you get into more serious outcomes, obviously the tools change, the motivations change, the triggers change. So Claire did a fantastic job of talking about the community manager and kind of the role they play in the bigger social business ecosystem. One of the things that's most important for internal community managers is to understand where communities really help workflows become more efficient. And so I've done a relatively standard knowledge our knowledge worker workflow. It's also kind of the scientific process. You have a vague idea, you come up with a hypothesis, you test it, you build something, you beta test that with a group, and then you launch it. And different size communities and different types of communities work best at different stages here. And so your job as the community manager is to help people understand which communities can really help at different stages. And I'll use my example because I do a lot of research. When I'm just starting to think about research, and I'm not sure if there's that research that exists in the world already, if I'm building on something, like what's out there, I go to the biggest network I have available to me because I want to know what I don't know yet. So for me, that's Twitter, because my company's 6 people and they kind of know what I know already, so that's not very helpful. They are helpful people, but they don't know everything. So I go to the biggest network possible, and I find out what that network can deliver back to me. And then I may go to a more focused community of practice just to correlate that or curate all of that information and ask other people what they think of what I've found and where gaps exist. And then the consolidation process, I really have to do that by myself. Like if I'm creating a hypothesis, you can crowdsource that, but like I have a point of view. I actively want to do something, so that's something I'm going to do by myself. But when I have my hypothesis or I run my analysis, that's another opportunity to go out to a community of practice and say, this is my hypothesis. Does that sound right? And people can be like, no, that doesn't speak to me. Or yes, you're right on. I've been wondering that myself. I'm lucky because we have a community of community managers and social business leaders. I can do that. And actually, it's how we validate a lot of the research we do. Does this work for you? Can you answer this question? And they will tell us, no, that's impossible to answer, so don't even ask me that question because you're not going to get good data back. And then the report, you really want a small project community or a working group, and you can work on a wiki there. It's not really a community, it's more of a project group. And then when you go back for stakeholder review, you can go to a stakeholder community and really have a asynchronous conversation about this before or after you present it. Now, by the time you launch this into the marketplace or into your internal network, you have a whole crew of advocates who have essentially co-created that research with you. And that's very powerful because they will support it. So now that you've posted it back out to the broader network, you have tens or hundreds of people who know what it is and trust the approach that you've taken with it, and so can vouch for it. And that's really, really critical too. So if you're internal community manager, walking through these specific workflows with people and making them aware of exactly how they run through that process can be really important, because this is part of the reason I think we have a communication challenge in the social business world. We're very vague. And people don't understand vague applied to my daily work. And so you really have to get down to a very specific level to help them understand. So the other concept that we have is communities change as they mature. They're very different in the early stages than they are in the later stages. And your strategy and approach to community management needs to be different as they grow. In the first stage, you are trying to establish a new behavior. That should be your only goal, and you should only work with a small group of people because it's very hard to get a large group of people to change all at once. You'll drive yourself crazy and you won't actually be successful anyways. That behavior change is what will drive ROI later in the community. And you can measure the difference between the old workflow and the new workflow, and you can say that at an individual level, if this person changes the behavior, this is the time savings or the cost savings you will get from that individual's work. And if I can scale this to 1,000 people, this is the aggregate ROI that I will get from changing this work process. So that's what you're doing. And once you've established that behavior change with a core group of people, a funny thing happens. Is they get so excited because it is a better way of doing something that they pull other people in. So the next phase is not about you, the community manager, going and pulling other people in. It's about enabling the people who you've evangelized with and helped change to draw their colleagues in so that they benefit. Because that trusted invitation will be far more effective at changing that next circle's behavior than you. You don't want to repeat what you just did in stage 1. You want to go faster in stage 2. Once you effectively get this pull, then you can start building momentum and growing the community because you've normalized the behavior at that point. And so if somebody comes into a community of 500 people who are all acting differently than them, what will they do? They'll change their behavior because they don't want to be the sore thumb. They don't want to be the one dancing on the hill or doing the old thing. And then the last phase, you really transform the business model or the business process that you're working on. And you end of life the old behavior and the old tool set. And I think people forget to do this. They forget to take away the old tools and the old methodologies. And so when people are stressed, they can revert to them. So once you're successful, be successful. Like, claim victory and move on to the next use case. So all of this we've packaged up in something we call the community maturity model. And our clients use this actually to assess their performance and where they want to be, and then apply initiatives against that, and have used that very successfully to drive budget decisions. It's a very good framework to use with executives because it frames the conversation for them, it bounds it, they can see what you're talking about, and you're very specific about what you want to do around each area. And everybody's starting from a different place on each of these competencies. I've seen companies that have like a stage 4 culture and no tool set. I've seen the reverse. People who have the tool set and have no ability to actually use the tool set because of the processes and the culture that exists. So again, just to reiterate, first phase, behavior change, pull, grow, transform. And then you can do this. You can assess your performance against the average of your organization. You can assess your performance against the average of the industry. Just a shameless plug, we have our survey open right now. So if you have a community right now, we will give you your score if you fill out the survey. It takes about 20 minutes. So that's me. And I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Actually, I would allow one question because we are
troublemakers. Yeah.
Can you use that one for answering?
My guess is that you have a perfect answer for this, but I just wanted to check, and it might
Don't
be.
So sure.
Well, you put up a slide that I think I saw tweeted a fair bit, and it was 3 things about engagement. And the first one was define the engagement you need. And I'm really curious about who gets to do the defining and the deciding about what's necessary when we're talking about a community.
I don't actually have the crispest answer for that, meaning that can be is actually not working at all.
It is working, but not as loud as.
That very much depends on the decision-making structure you've set up around social business and your general decision-making environment at your organization. I think it's up to the social business and community team to suggest that engagement that you want to see that will achieve an output, because people or executives who don't understand what's possible in the environment won't understand. Like, they don't know what to ask for because they don't understand the potential. So I think it's a conversation to have, right? So I don't necessarily think the community manager, yeah, I'm like a 35-year-old mid-level manager, I've just been assigned community management, I understand how I'm gonna train. So like, I don't think it's the community manager's role necessarily to decide, but it's their role to facilitate what that is. I don't think it's ever that clear in an organization, right? So I think bosses have been in denial that they control things for many years, and people have done whatever they want anyways. So I think you can shoot for something, you can then see how it's applied and how it's used. Your community members may show you a better way, and you adapt. So I think it's a continually conversation about what's the best way to execute and be more efficient. But I think if you don't put a bogey out there, I like to say you need something to shoot at. Like, you need to give people something to shoot at or complain against or to critique, because in the absence of that, nobody knows what to do. So it's just putting that first thing out there and saying, this is a methodology to get us closer to where we want to go, and then adapt.
Okay, thank you, Rachel.